Imagine standing in a field 12,000 years ago. No steel, no iron, not even bronze. Just stone, wood, bone, antler. And yet, the people standing in that field are about to do something no human being has ever done before. They are about to feed a village without a single metal tool in their hands. This is the story of how humanity built the machine that made civilization possible, using nothing but the earth itself. This is the story of farming without metal. For nearly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived as wanderers. We followed herds. We chased seasons. We ate what the land offered, and when the land offered nothing, we starved. There was no such thing as a harvest. No such thing as a stored future. Every single day was a gamble against hunger. And then, somewhere between the last ice age and the world we know today, something extraordinary happened. A small group of people in a land we now call the Middle East stopped chasing food. They started growing it. But here's the question almost nobody asks. How? How do you cut a stalk of wild wheat without a blade of steel? How do you break open hard, dry soil without an iron plow? How do you turn wild grass into a harvest using only stone, wood, and bone? The answer to that question didn't just feed a few families. It rebuilt the entire trajectory of our species. In the 1990s, archaeologists were excavating a site called Ohalo II on the shores of the Sea of Galilee in Israel, a site so well preserved that it had been sealed underwater for thousands of years, protecting fragile organic material that almost never survives. What they found stunned researchers. Tiny flint blades, barely a few centimeters long, showing a strange, glassy shine along one edge. That shine has a name. Archaeologists call it sickle glass, a microscopic sheen that forms only one way. When a blade is used, again and again, to slice through the silica-rich stems of grass and cereal plants. The Ohalo II site has been dated to roughly 23,000 years ago, almost 12,000 years before farming was ever thought to have begun. Let that sink in. Long before anyone built a village, planted a seed on purpose, or domesticated an animal, someone, sitting by an ancient lake, was already harvesting wild grain with a handmade stone blade. This wasn't farming yet, but it was the first fingerprint of a farming mind. And it raised a haunting question for historians. If humans had this tool 23,000 years ago, why did it take so many thousands of years for farming to actually begin? Around 12,900 years ago, the climate turned violent. A sudden cold snap, known as the Younger Dryas, gripped the northern hemisphere, drying out the lush wild grain fields that hunter-gatherer communities in the Levant had relied on for generations. Food that had once grown freely began to disappear. And in the middle of this crisis, a culture archaeologists call the Natufians, living in what is now Israel, Jordan, and Syria between roughly 14,500 and 11,500 years ago, did something remarkable. They didn't just search harder for wild grain. They began managing it. British archaeologist Dorothy Garrett, excavating caves at Mount Carmel and Shukba in the 1920s and 30s, uncovered something she almost couldn't explain. Dozens of small, crescent-shaped flint blades, called lunettes, many of them coated in that same sickle glass found at Ohalo II. These blades weren't randomly shaped. They were crafted to be slotted into handles made of bone or wood, locked in with natural resin, to form a composite tool, a true sickle. Alongside the sickles, Garrett and later researchers, including archaeologist Lior Groman of Hebrew University, found something else. Heavy stone mortars and pestles, some carved directly into bedrock. This was not an accident. It was a system. Cut the grain with a stone-bladed sickle. Carry it home. Pound it in a stone mortar. Turn wild grass into edible flour. Recent experimental archaeology, reconstructing this exact process using replica Natufian tools, proved something extraordinary. Those simple stone mortars were efficient enough to process wild barley into fine flour capable of feeding real communities. For the first time in human history, food security didn't depend on luck. It depended on tools. But cutting grain was only the beginning of the problem. Because a sickle can harvest a plant, It cannot plant one. To grow food on purpose, ancient humans needed to break open the ground, and they had no metal to do it with. So they turned to the oldest tool our species ever built, the digging stick. This sounds almost too simple to matter, but archaeological evidence tells a different story. At Kalambo Falls in Zambia, researchers discovered wooden digging tools dated to as far back as 476,000 years ago, created by human ancestors long before Homo sapiens even existed. In Italy, at a site called Paghetti Vecchi, wooden digging sticks were shaped and fire-hardened tens of thousands of years before farming began. By the time the Natufians and the first Neolithic farmers of the Near East needed to till soil, the digging stick had already been humanity's companion for hundreds of thousands of years. But a sharpened stick alone wasn't enough to till a field. So farmers began attaching cross pieces of bone, antler, or wood to the top of the stick, creating extra leverage, extra force, extra control. The digging stick was evolving into something new, something that would soon change the shape of the human world. We're standing right at the edge of the breakthrough, because in the next part of this story, that simple digging stick will transform into humanity's first true farming machine, and the consequences will reach every civilization that follows. Around the early Neolithic period, in the same region where sickles were already in daily use, farmers began carving something new out of animal antler. A curved, blade-like head, fastened to a wooden handle. This was the antler hoe. Unlike a simple digging stick, the antler hoe could break and turn soil far more efficiently, loosening compacted earth so that seeds could actually take root. Antler was the ideal material. It's dense, but flexible enough not to shatter under repeated impact, almost as if nature had built the perfect farming blade millennia before metal ever existed. Archaeologists studying farming communities across the ancient Near East and later across Neolithic Europe, including the Cucutini Tripilia culture of modern-day Ukraine and Moldova, have recovered stone and antler hoes alongside flint sickle blades at settlement after settlement, confirming that this combination of tools became the backbone of early agriculture. Farming was no longer just about harvesting what grew wild. It was about preparing the earth on purpose. Here's where the story turns from clever tool making into something far bigger. The birth of the plow. The earliest plows, known to archaeologists as ards, were essentially digging sticks re-engineered to be pulled, rather than pushed by hand. Evidence for the ard first appears in the Near East by roughly the 6th millennium BC, and it spread rapidly through West Asia, South Asia, and Europe over the following millennia. But here's the twist historians still debate. Was the ard pulled by humans first, or by domesticated animals from the very beginning? The evidence increasingly points to a partnership. The ard is closely tied to the domestication of cattle, meaning that around the same era humans were shaping wood into farming blades, they were also learning to harness animal power. Two revolutions converging into one machine. In Europe, archaeologists have found preserved ard marks, long shallow scratches cut into ancient subsoil, dating back to roughly 3,500 to 3,000 BC, even before the oldest surviving wooden ard itself, found at Lavagon, Italy, dated to around 2,300 to 2000 BC. And in Ukraine, at a site called Grebenukhiv Yar, archaeologists uncovered something remarkable. An actual antler ard, dated to the late 5th or early 4th millennium BC. Physical proof that some of the earliest plows on Earth weren't made of metal at all. They were made of bone. For decades, some historians doubted that Stone Age tools could have realistically supported large-scale farming. So scientists decided to test it. In experiments conducted at the Laboratory of Primitive Techniques at the Institute of Archaeology in Leningrad, researchers built exact replicas of prehistoric tools, oak digging sticks, antler hoes, wooden ards, and used them to till and harvest real fields, exactly as Neolithic farmers would have. The results were staggering. A digging stick alone could till roughly 2.5 square meters of virgin, grass-covered soil per person, per hour. An antler hoe pushed that number up to around 6 square meters per hour. But the ard, pulled by a horse, guided by 2 people, could till the same difficult soil at a rate of over 375 square meters per hour. That is more than 50 times faster than tilling by hand. This single number explains why the plow didn't just improve farming. It exploded it. Suddenly, one family could till land that would have taken 50 hours of back-breaking hand labor in less than one. Suddenly, farming could scale beyond a garden. It could feed a village, then a town, then a city. Here is the twist historians still argue about. Farming without metal didn't just create food surpluses. It created something humanity had never truly experienced before: inequality. For the first time, some families could till more land than others. Some stored more grain than their neighbors. Land itself became something to own, to defend, to inherit. Archaeologists studying early farming settlements across the Near East and Europe have long noted that the shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture coincided with the emergence of denser populations, permanent architecture, and eventually social hierarchy. There is also a darker side that scientific studies have confirmed. Skeletal remains from early farming communities frequently show signs of harder physical labor, poorer nutrition variety, and higher rates of infectious disease compared to hunter-gatherer populations before them. Living close together, alongside domesticated animals, created new pathways for disease that simply hadn't existed when humans lived in small, mobile bands. In other words, the very tools that saved humanity from starvation also introduced new struggles humanity had never faced before. This is the paradox at the heart of the Neolithic revolution: progress and hardship arriving in the very same hand-carved tool. You might think stone and bone farming tools disappeared the moment metal arrived. They didn't. In parts of the world where metal was scarce or slow to spread, wooden ards, antler hoes, and stone-bladed sickles remained in daily use for thousands of years after the first Bronze Age tools appeared elsewhere. Some traditional farming communities, particularly in remote regions, used variations of these tools well into the modern era. And the deeper truth is this: almost every farming tool you can picture today, the hoe, the plow, the sickle, the scythe, is a direct descendant of a design first carved from wood, bone, and antler by people who had never seen a piece of metal in their lives. The steel plow that transformed modern agriculture didn't invent a new idea. It sharpened an old one. Every single person alive today, every city, every supermarket, every harvest exists because a group of humans, tens of thousands of years ago, refused to accept that survival meant constant wandering and constant hunger. They didn't have metal. They didn't have machines. They didn't even have a word for agriculture. What they had was observation, patience, and the willingness to shape the natural materials around them, stone, wood, bone, antler, into something the world had never seen. A tool that could grow the future. The next time you hold a shovel, walk past a wheat field, or even eat a piece of bread, remember that the true revolution didn't begin with metal. It began with a sharpened stick, a flint blade, and a species that refused to go hungry.